He said it was a family trip. I believed him, right up until I found the two first-class tickets. My name was on one, his on the other, but our daughter was left behind. When I confronted him, he laughed it off, saying it was just business. He didn't realize that his business would cost him $100,000. For me, it wasn't a loss. It was the price for my ticket to freedom and a life of unapologetic luxury. My name is Rachel Moore. I am, or perhaps was, a creature of order. At 37, my life in Denver was a testament to meticulous planning, a landscape of predictable comfort built on the solid bedrock of logic and foresight. As a financial planner, I dealt in futures. I charted out retirements, college funds, and investment portfolios, transforming the chaotic whims of the market into straight, reliable lines trending upwards. My world was one of spreadsheets, asset allocation, and risk management. I believed that any problem could be solved if you simply looked at the numbers, identified the discrepancy, and corrected the variable. My own life, I thought, was my most successful portfolio, a beautiful Victorian house in the Highlands, a bright, precocious 80-year-old daughter, and a husband whose ambition was once the most exciting asset I had ever acquired. That husband is Ethan, a senior manager at a high-flying advertising agency downtown. He spoke a language of brands, campaigns, and demographics that I never fully understood. He was the artist to my analyst, the chaotic energy to my calm. In the beginning, that difference was magnetic. Now, it had become a chasm. For months, he had been wearing his exhaustion like a bespoke suit, tailored perfectly to elicit sympathy. He'd come home long after our daughter, Sophie, was asleep, smelling of expensive whiskey and the vague, non-committal scent of a client dinner. He would sigh, a deep, performative sound that filled the silence in our kitchen, and rub his temples as he spoke of impossible deadlines and demanding clients. "I need a break, Rach," he'd murmur, staring into the middle distance. "Just a week to shut my brain off." I'd watch him, this man who was becoming a stranger, and feel a pang of something I mistook for empathy. So when he proposed the trip, I saw it as a lifeline. He brought it up on a Tuesday evening, over a dinner that was as silent and cold as the marble of our countertop. He swirled the wine in his glass, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in years. "What would you say to a family trip?" he began, his voice unnaturally bright. "Florida. The company has a corporate condo in a resort near Naples. They'll cover a big chunk of it. A bonus for the Rivington account I landed." He painted a picture of white sand, turquoise water, and uninterrupted time. For us, as a family, the word family hung in the air between us, shimmering with a desperate, fragile hope. It felt like the perfect variable to correct our course, to bring our diverging lines back to a comfortable parallel. A fool's hope, as it turns out, but I clung to it. I was so starved for connection that I feasted on the crumbs he threw me. The last 6 months had been a slow erosion of intimacy, a quiet death by 1,000 paper cuts. Conversations had been reduced to logistics: who was picking up Sophie, whether the property taxes had been paid, what we needed from the grocery store. We moved around each other with the polite distance of roommates who had forgotten why they'd ever decided to live together. The shared smiles felt like muscle memory, and the space between us in our king-sized bed had grown into a vast, icy tundra. This trip, I told myself, would be a thaw. It would be the sun we needed. I imagined Sophie building sandcastles, her laughter mixing with the sound of the waves. I imagined holding Ethan's hand, the gesture feeling natural again, not forced. I allowed myself to be happy, to believe in the beautiful, simple lie he was selling. I bought it wholesale. The first crack in the facade appeared, as it so often does, in the quiet glow of a computer screen. 3 days before we were scheduled to leave, I was in my home office, finalizing some of my own work before the vacation. An email from Ethan's corporate travel portal was sitting in our shared inbox. The subject line was innocuous, "Flight confirmation more trip." I opened it, intending only to confirm our seat assignments and maybe see if I could arrange for a special meal for Sophie. My eyes scanned the PDF attachment. There it was, Denver to Fort Myers, first class. A pleasant surprise. Ethan must have really impressed them. Then I saw the passenger manifest. Passenger 1, Ethan Moore. Passenger 2, Rachel Moore. I read it again, and again. I scrolled down, thinking perhaps our daughter's ticket was on a separate confirmation, a different booking. There was nothing, just 2 names, his and mine. The crisp, digital letters seemed to mock me. Family trip, he had said. The word echoed in the silent room, sour and fraudulent. The cold dread that pooled in my stomach was a familiar sensation. It was the feeling of a stock market crash, the sickening lurch of a portfolio turning from black to red in a single brutal moment. I confronted him that evening, choosing my moment carefully. He was in the living room, scrolling through his phone, a placid look on his face. I kept my voice level, the practiced calm of a professional delivering bad news. Ethan, I was looking at the flight confirmation. I only see 2 tickets. I watched his face. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of panic crossed his eyes before the mask of easy charm snapped back into place. He laughed. It wasn't a warm, genuine laugh. It was a sound effect, a tool to dismiss and deflect. "Oh, that," he said, waving a hand breezily. "Babe, the corporate perk only covers the employee and spouse. It's just policy. We'll book Sophie's ticket separately. It's no big deal." He said it with such casual confidence that, for a moment, I almost believed him. But his explanation didn't address the core issue. Why hadn't he mentioned it before? Why present it as a family trip from the company if our family wasn't fully included? "So Sophie will fly economy while we're in first class?" I asked, the question hanging in the air. "She'll be fine," he said, his eyes already returning to the bright screen of his phone. "She'll probably prefer it. She can watch movies the whole time." He didn't see the problem, or rather, he didn't care that I saw it. I tried to believe him, for Sophie's sake, for the memory of the man I had married. I tried to force the puzzle pieces to fit, but the lie had a scent, a distinct, cloying odor that now clung to everything. It was in the way he angled his phone away from me, the screen suddenly going dark whenever I walked into the room. It was in the hushed, hurried phone call he took on the patio, his back turned to the kitchen window, his voice a low murmur I couldn't quite decipher. It was in the over-the-top affection, the sudden kisses to my forehead that felt less like love and more like misdirection. The world I had built on logic and trust was beginning to feel like a house of cards in a hurricane. Every gust of wind, every small inconsistency, threatened to bring the whole thing crashing down. I felt hyper-aware, my senses turned up to an almost painful volume, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for the truth he was so intent on hiding. The night before our departure, the truth found me. Ethan was in the shower, the sound of water drumming against the tiles a steady rhythm against my pounding heart. Sophie was sound asleep in her room, her small chest rising and falling in the soft glow of her nightlight. I was in our walk-in closet, ostensibly to pack my last few things, but really, I was just tidying his side, an act of wifely duty that had become an act of espionage. His suitcase lay open on the ottoman, a neat collection of linen shirts and swim trunks. My fingers brushed against a zippered compartment on the side. Inside, my hand closed around a small, hard box. It was from a boutique downtown, one known for its delicate, expensive lingerie. The box was wrapped in silver paper with a silk ribbon. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was not for me. My hands trembled as I carefully slid the ribbon off and lifted the lid just a fraction of an inch. A whisper of emerald green silk lay nestled in tissue paper. My color was sapphire blue, always had been, beneath the box. My fingers found something else, a hotel keycard sleeve. The logo was not from the family-friendly resort Ethan had booked for us. It was for the Azure Palace, a notoriously exclusive and romantic hotel on a private key a half-hour away. The reservation slip tucked inside was for a king suite, and the name on it was not more. There was no explosion, no screaming match. The rage I should have felt was instantly sublimated. transformed into something cold, quiet, and terrifyingly clear. The emotional part of my brain shut down, and the financial planner took over. Grief was a liability. Fury was an unmanaged asset. What I needed now was data. I walked out of the closet, leaving the suitcase exactly as I had found it. I sat down at my desk, the one where I managed the futures of dozens of families, and opened my laptop. The familiar glow of the screen was a comfort. I logged into our joint accounts, checking savings, our brokerage portfolio, the 3 credit cards we shared, and I began to work. With the detached precision of an auditor, I started taking screenshots. I downloaded 3 years of bank statements. I saved every credit card bill as a PDF. I documented every large withdrawal, every hotel charge in cities he'd supposedly visited for solo business trips, every jewelry store purchase that I had never seen. I created a new folder on a thumb drive, hidden deep within my work files. I named it Project Freedom. Each click of the mouse was a quiet declaration of war. Each saved file was a bullet I was loading into a magazine. I didn't know it then, sitting in the dark with only the light of the screen on my face, that this was the beginning of my new life. The woman who had packed for a family vacation to Florida was gone. She had died quietly in a walk-in closet, somewhere between a sliver of green silk and a fraudulent hotel key. In her place sat a different woman, one who understood that love could be a bad investment, and that the only person you could truly count on to secure your future was yourself. This vacation was no longer about reconciliation, it was about reconnaissance. It was the start of the most important audit of my life, and I would make sure my husband, Ethan, the man who thought I was too trusting to see and too timid to act, was about to pay for every single unaccounted-for transaction, with interest. The hum of the Gulfstream's engines was a soothing, monotonous drone, a perfect white noise to stage a performance against. As the plane climbed through the thin Colorado air, leaving the sharp peaks of the Rockies behind, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and feigned sleep. The plush leather of the first-class seat was a mockery, a luxury purchased with shared money to facilitate a singular betrayal. I slowed my breathing, letting my body go slack, transforming myself into the image of a trusting, tired wife. Through the sliver of a gap beneath my eyelashes, I watched him. Ethan wasn't looking at the clouds or reading the in-flight magazine. His attention was focused entirely on the phone in his lap, his thumbs moving with a practiced urgency. He thought I was asleep. He thought he was safe. The screen's reflection was faint in the polished chrome of the seatbelt buckle, but it was enough. I saw the open messaging app, a single initial. C, at the top of the thread. My heart didn't pound. It turned to a cold, heavy stone in my chest. This was it, the confirmation. His message was short, the casual intimacy of it a blade twisting in my gut. Boarded, can't wait for tonight. A wave of nausea, hot and acidic, rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Emotion was a luxury I could no longer afford. My mind, the part of me that saw patterns and calculated risks, took over. I didn't focus on the pain. I focused on the phone number visible at the top of the screen, just below the initial. I committed it to memory, repeating the 10 digits in my mind like a sacred mantra. 727550182. 727550182. It was no longer a phone number. It was an exhibit. Exhibit A. When we landed in Florida, the humid air wrapped around us like a hot, wet blanket. It felt oppressive, suffocating. We collected our bags and took a car to the sprawling, family-friendly resort Ethan had booked for us. It was a symphony of manufactured fun, a lazy river, squealing children, and staff with unnervingly wide smiles. It was a perfect camouflage. After a bellhop had taken our luggage to the room, Ethan checked his watch with a theatrical sigh. "Babe, I'm so sorry about this," he started, the lie already smooth on his tongue. "An investor for the new campaign. He happens to be in town. He can only meet this afternoon. I have to go shake his hand. You know how it is." He kissed my forehead. a gesture so devoid of genuine affection it felt like ice against my skin. "I'll be back for dinner. Don't let me stop you from hitting the pool." I smiled, a perfectly crafted expression of wifely understanding. "Of course, honey. Go. Take care of business." The moment the door clicked shut behind him, my own operation began. I had come prepared. I pulled a prepaid burner phone from my carry-on and dialed the number for a private car service I had researched and booked from Denver. 10 minutes later, a discreet black sedan was waiting for me at the resort's entrance. "Follow the silver convertible that just left," I told the driver, my voice calm and even. "Stay 2 cars behind." He nodded, his face impassive in the rearview mirror. The drive was short, a 20-minute journey away from the land of cartoon mascots and into the realm of adult indulgence. He pulled into the valet circle of the Azure Palace. It was exactly as the website had promised: sleek, modern, and radiating an aura of expensive exclusivity. I had the driver park across the street, in the shade of a banyan tree, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Ethan got out of his car, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in a year. He wasn't a man going to a business meeting. He was a man arriving for a tryst. A moment later, a woman emerged from the hotel's revolving doors. She was tall, blonde, and poured into a simple white sundress that clung to her body. She was the living embodiment of a midlife crisis cliché. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. He closed the distance between them and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her into an embrace that was both hungry and familiar. My breath hitched, a single, involuntary gasp. The analytical part of my brain took a step back, and for a searing second, the betrayed wife was in control. I felt the primal urge to get out of the car, to scream, to claw at her perfectly tanned face. But then I remembered my goal. This wasn't about a confrontation. It was about a collection. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was steady. I raised the burner phone. The lens of its camera felt like the scope of a rifle. I took a photo of the embrace, then another of the kiss that followed, deep and lingering. I switched to video, recording them as they laughed, his hand possessively on the small of her back, and walked arm in arm into the hotel. Evidence, clear, irrefutable, and damning. As they disappeared inside, I opened the banking app on my personal phone. I didn't have to wait long. A notification popped up. Charge alert, $758.22, at the Azure Palace. Another screenshot. Every move he made, every dollar he spent from our shared funds to entertain this woman, was another nail he was hammering into his own financial coffin. I saved the files to my secure cloud storage, adding them to the Project Freedom folder. Then I told the driver to take me back. That evening, I played the part of my life. I wore a blue dress my color and let my hair down. When Ethan returned, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, I greeted him with a warm smile. He spun a detailed story about the meeting, naming a fictional investor and inventing tedious contract details. I listened with rapt attention, nodding and asking the right questions. We went to dinner at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The air was warm. The tiki torches cast a romantic glow, and the sound of the gentle waves lapping the shore should have been soothing. To me, it sounded like a countdown. We ordered champagne. When the glasses arrived, bubbling and cold, I raised mine. I looked him straight in the eye, my expression a perfect mask of contentment. "To new beginnings," I said, my voice soft. He smiled, a genuine, unsuspecting smile, and clinked his glass against mine. "To new beginnings," he echoed, completely oblivious that his new beginning was a catastrophic end, and mine was a glorious, well-funded escape. He had no idea what I had done just an hour earlier, while he was in the shower washing the scent of his mistress off his skin. I had excused myself to the balcony to take a call from my office, with the sound of the ocean as my cover. I had opened my banking app. I navigated to our joint savings account, a healthy repository holding just over $100,000, money we had been saving for a down payment on a mountain cabin. It was our future, our shared dream. In less than 90 seconds, I dismantled it. I initiated a wire transfer for the full amount. The recipient was a new corporate account I had set up 2 days prior, for a limited liability company I had registered online. The name I chose was a small, vicious piece of poetry, my own private joke. Celine Media, LLC. I typed in the name, a tribute to the woman with the initial C. Let her be the namesake for my liberation fund. My finger hovered over the confirmation button for only a second. There was no hesitation. I pressed it. A simple digital action that felt as definitive and as powerful as signing a Declaration of Independence. 2 days later, his carefully constructed world began to wobble. He tried to buy something at one of the hotel's high-end boutiques, a watch I knew was destined for her wrist. His credit card was declined. Annoyed, he tried his debit card. Declined. A frown creased his forehead. He stepped outside to call the bank, his voice tight with frustration. He came back to the room later, his face pale. "Rach, something's wrong," he said, trying to sound calm. "The savings account, it's empty, and they've put a security freeze on the checking account. Did you move any money?" I looked up from my book, my face a canvas of wide-eyed innocence and concern. "What? No, of course not. Oh my God. Ethan, do you think we were hacked?" I flooded him with panicked questions, suggesting possibilities, fueling his own fear and confusion. I told him I'd received a suspicious phishing email a few days ago and had clicked on a link before I realized my mistake, and maybe I'd compromised our security. "I called the fraud department right away," I lied smoothly. "They said they were putting a temporary hold on everything to investigate. It's for our own protection." He ran his hands through his hair, agitated. "For how long?" "They said it could take a few business days," I replied, my voice laced with feigned helplessness. "You know how it is. The bank has its procedures." He believed me. Of course, he did. He had never once looked at me and seen a strategist. He saw a wife, a mother, a woman who balanced their checkbook, but who didn't understand the complex architecture of finance. He was wrong. I had spent 15 years navigating that world. I knew that every transaction, every digital handshake, leaves an indelible trail. My transfer, from a joint account to an LLC, of which I was the sole owner, was legally gray but defensible. His expenditures a secret hotel room, expensive gifts, lavish dinners for his mistress, all paid for with marital funds were not. That was called dissipation of assets, and it had a clear, traceable, and very expensive paper trail. He was playing a short game, driven by impulse and ego. I was playing the long game, armed with data, patience, and a righteous glacial fury. As I watched him pace the room, shouting into his phone at some poor, underpaid bank employee, I felt nothing but a profound and chilling calm. The woman who loved him, who had built a life with him, was well and truly gone. I was no longer his wife, not in any way that mattered. I was the architect of his downfall. He thought he was on vacation. In reality, he was in a cage I had built around him, and he was only just beginning to rattle the bars. He was about to learn that I was not just the woman who shared his bed. I was the woman who was going to take everything he had, and it would all start with the $100,000 he didn't even know he'd lost yet. 3 days, 72 hours of living inside a meticulously constructed play. I performed the role of the concerned wife flawlessly, discussing the bank fraud with Ethan in hushed, worried tones while our daughter Sophie splashed happily in the resort pool. He was agitated, constantly checking his phone for updates from the bank that I knew would never come. He was a man trapped in a state of suspended animation, his financial life frozen solid, and he had no idea the architect of his prison was sitting 3 feet away, applying sunscreen to his daughter's back. On the 3rd day, as I was sitting on a lounge chair watching Sophie attempt a handstand in the shallow end, my personal phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was not a number I recognized. The message was a short, sharp jab of text. "Did you move the money?" "He said it's in your name." The sender was anonymous, but I knew it was her. C. Celine. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. a tiny, private, muscular contraction that no one would ever notice. I didn't feel rage or a desire for confrontation. I felt something far more potent validation. It was the quiet, thrilling hum of a complex equation resolving into a simple, elegant solution. In their panic, they had made a fatal error. He had discussed our joint finances with his mistress, and she was foolish enough to contact me directly, confirming their collusion in writing. They had just handed me the final, irrefutable piece of evidence I needed. With a steady hand, I took a screenshot of the message, complete with the originating phone number. I did not reply. I saved the image to my secure folder, labeling it Exhibit B. They thought they were cornering me. In reality, they had just confirmed every charge my lawyer would one day level against them. They had confirmed everything. The flight back to Denver was thick with a silence that felt heavier than the clouds we were flying through. Ethan was sullen and withdrawn, the frustration of his financial impotence simmering just beneath the surface. He was a king locked out of his own treasury. He kept glancing at me, suspicion warring with the persona of the aggrieved husband he was trying so desperately to project. I simply read a book, my demeanor placid, my pulse as steady as a metronome. I was a calm sea, concealing the terrifying depths below. When we got home, the house felt different. It was no longer our home. It was a contested asset. He immediately retreated to his home office, claiming he was exhausted from the trip and buried in work emails. He had no idea that his password would no longer grant him access. While he was performing the role of the beleaguered executive, I was quietly orchestrating a digital coup. I sat at my own desk and, one by one, methodically changed the password to every single account we shared: the mortgage portal, the utility companies, our joint investment portfolio, the car payments, the Amazon Prime account, the Netflix account. It was a tedious, systematic process of excision. With each new password, I created complex, unguessable strings of characters. I was erasing him from the life we had built. I was locking him out, not just of our finances, but of the very infrastructure of our shared existence. He was becoming a ghost in his own home, and he didn't even know it yet. The next morning, I drove downtown. My destination was the sleek glass and steel office building that housed the law firm of Margaret Shaw. Maggie and I had been friends since college, back when our lives were unwritten pages filled with cheap beer and boundless, naive optimism. We had navigated bad breakups and career fears together, but our paths had diverged. I had chosen the quiet, unstructured world of financial planning and domestic life. Maggie had chosen the battlefield. She had become one of Denver's most feared divorce attorneys, a specialist in forensic accounting and asset fraud. She was exactly who I needed. Her office was stark and minimalist, with a single, brutalist orchid on her desk. She looked at me over the top of her glasses, her expression sharp and assessing. "Rachel," she said, her voice devoid of pity, "you look like you're here for business." I didn't cry. I didn't allow my voice to tremble. I laid out the situation with the same dispassionate clarity I would use to describe a client's portfolio. I spoke of the separate hotel, the financial discrepancies, the mistress. I presented it not as a heartbreak, but as a breach of contract, a fraudulent misappropriation of shared assets. Maggie listened, her fingers steepled, not interrupting once. When I was finished, she leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Let me be clear. Rachel," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet of the room. "If he used marital funds, joint money to finance an affair, to pay for hotels, gifts, and dinners for his mistress, we can do more than just get you your half. In this state, that's dissipation of assets. We can make him pay it all back from his share of the settlement. We can make him bleed." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "If you have the proof, we can leave him with practically nothing." "I have the proof," I said simply. I opened my laptop and turned it to face her. I clicked open the folder labeled Project Freedom. One by one, I showed her everything: the crystal-clear photos of Ethan and Celine embracing outside the Azure Palace, the short video clip of them walking into the lobby, his hand proprietarily on her back, the downloaded credit card statements, with the charges for the hotel and the lingerie boutique highlighted in yellow, the flight confirmation showing only 2 first-class tickets, and finally, the pièce de résistance, the screenshot of the text message from Celine. Maggie's expression remained neutral, but I saw her eyebrows raise almost imperceptibly. She scrolled through the files, her focus absolute. It was the look of a master craftsman admiring a perfectly constructed weapon. "My God, Rachel," she said, finally looking up at me. "You've done all the work for me. This is airtight. This isn't a case, it's a demolition." That evening, the calm in our house finally broke. Ethan had spent the day discovering the full extent of his digital exile, his frustration mounting with every password incorrect notification. He found me in the kitchen, where I was calmly preparing dinner for Sophie. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of wounded indignation. "What did you do, Rachel?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "I can't log into anything. The bank, the credit cards, anything. What the hell is going on?" He tried to soften his approach, to fall back on his old tools of emotional manipulation. Don't you trust me?" The question was so absurd, so profoundly disconnected from our reality, that I almost laughed. I turned from the stove to face him, my expression unreadable. "I believe in data, Ethan," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I no longer trust words." He stared at me, truly stared at me, for the first time in months, and in that moment, he saw it. He saw that the woman he thought he knew was gone. He was looking at me, but he wasn't seeing the accommodating, trusting wife he had married 15 years ago. He wasn't seeing the hopeful young woman who had cried at our wedding, nor the exhausted, radiant mother who had held our daughter for the first time. That woman had been slowly dying for years, a death by 1,000 little lies and 1,000,000 moments of neglect. His betrayal in Florida had been the final, fatal blow. The person standing before him now was a stranger. She was a quiet, calculating echo of the woman he had destroyed, a perfect replica animated not by love or hope, but by cold, hard logic and an unshakable resolve. She was a financial planner, after all, and she was about to liquidate his entire world. With the battle lines drawn in the quiet of our kitchen, the Cold War turned hot. But this was not a war that would be fought with shouting matches or slammed doors. My weapons were different. They were spreadsheets, bank records, and the unblinking, impartial logic of numbers. The day after Maggie confirmed the strength of my position, I began the formal audit of my life. It was no longer just about gathering evidence for a divorce. It was about a full-scale forensic accounting of the 15 years I had invested in the failing enterprise that was my marriage. I treated our shared finances like a hostile takeover target, and I was the activist investor determined to expose every hidden debt and fraudulent asset. My home office became a command center. I worked with a ferocious, focused energy I hadn't felt in years. The grief that had been a dull ache in my chest was replaced by the clean, sharp adrenaline of the hunt. I started with our primary investment portfolio, a collection of mutual funds and stocks we had built together. It was clean, thankfully. Too many compliance checks for him to easily siphon money from there. Then I moved to the secondary accounts, the forgotten ones that people often overlook: an old savings account with a few $1,000s, a certificate of deposit we'd opened for Sophie years ago. Small discrepancies began to appear. A few $100s here and there, transferred to a personal account of his, I didn't recognize. These were his pocket money. His slush fund for lunches and small gifts I now understood were not for me. I logged each one, a running tally of petty betrayals. The real discovery, the one that would detonate his entire life, was buried deeper. I was tracing the flow of money from his corporate expense account. He had a shell corporation, More Inc., that he used for his freelance consulting work, or so he had told me. It was a legitimate business entity, but as I cross-referenced the statements from his corporate credit card with the deposits into More Inc., I saw a glaring pattern. inflated expense reports, reimbursements for client dinners that never happened, vendor payments for fictitious services. He was systematically defrauding his own company on a small but consistent scale, laundering the money through his shell corp. It was arrogant, sloppy, and utterly damning. But that wasn't the big one. The big one was the wire transfer I'd been searching for, the one that explained where our dreams had really gone. Tucked away in the quarterly statements for eMore Inc. was a single, massive line item, a withdrawal of exactly $100,000, dated just 2 weeks before our trip to Florida. The description was vague. Initial capital investment, CM, project, CM, my blood ran cold. It had to be a coincidence, but I had learned there were no coincidences in an audit. There were only patterns you hadn't yet deciphered. I dug deeper, running a search for the transaction number through the state's business registry, and there it was. The money had been transferred to a newly registered LLC. The company had been founded just 16 days ago. Its business purpose was listed as Media Consulting and Brand Development, and its name was Celine Media LLC. My own private joke had turned out to be the literal, staggering truth. The registered agent and sole officer of the company was listed as Celine Harris. Celine, his C. He hadn't just used our money to take her on vacation. He had embezzled $100,000, the money we had saved, the nest egg for our future, the funds I had so carefully managed, and used it to bankroll his mistress's new company. It was a staggering act of financial infidelity, so brazen and reckless it took my breath away. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had stolen from our family to build a new life with hers. This changed everything. This was no longer just a divorce case about the dissipation of marital assets. This was bank fraud. This was tax evasion. The $100,000 was listed as a business expense for eMore Inc., a tax write-off, but it was a personal gift, a transfer of assets masquerading as a business transaction. He was committing a felony. For a moment, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The sheer scale of his deceit was almost too much to comprehend, but the shock quickly receded, replaced by an icy, diamond-hard resolve. He had handed me a nuclear weapon, and I was going to use it. I did not call Maggie. I did not call Ethan. I spent the next hour compiling a neat, organized digital file. It contained the eMore Inc. bank statement showing the withdrawal, the state registration document for Celine Media LLC showing Celine Harris as the owner, and a brief, dispassionate cover letter explaining the discrepancy. I logged onto the official website for the Internal Revenue Service. I navigated to the whistleblower office page. The program was designed to reward citizens who report significant tax fraud. I filled out the form, uploading my meticulously prepared file as supporting documentation. I reported my own husband to the federal government. As I clicked submit, I felt a profound sense of release. It was the cleanest, most final act of my life. I wasn't a scorned wife seeking revenge. I was a citizen reporting a crime. I was simply correcting the numbers. The fallout was not immediate, but when it came, it was swift and brutal. 2 weeks later, Ethan was served with a notice. He was being formally investigated by the IRS for tax fraud and by his own company for embezzlement. They had summoned him for an official inquiry. He came home that night, the color drained from his face, a single sheet of paper trembling in his hand. He looked broken, terrified. He didn't speak. He just stared at me, his eyes pleading for an explanation, for a denial, for anything other than the truth he was starting to suspect. I said nothing. I finished loading the dishwasher, walked past him, and went to my office. I found the article online, a small piece on a local business news site, a dry report about a senior manager at his agency being placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into corporate misuse of funds. I copied the link. I opened a new email, addressed it to him, and pasted the link in the body. I didn't add a subject line or a signature. I just hit send. I heard his phone chime in the living room. A few seconds of silence, then a choked, guttural roar of pure rage. He burst into my office, his face purple with fury, the man of cool confidence completely gone. replaced by a cornered, panicked animal. He held his phone up, the screen glowing with the headline, "You," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You did this? Did you do this?" He was unraveling, the polished veneer cracking to reveal the ugly, desperate man beneath. I swiveled in my chair to face him, my hands folded calmly on my desk. My heart was beating a steady, even rhythm. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of his anger. I looked directly into his eyes, and the woman he saw there was not his wife. She was his judge, jury, and executioner. I didn't create the lie. "Ethan," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning, "I just reported the incorrect data. The numbers were wrong. You were the one who made them wrong." His face crumpled. The accusation died on his lips because he knew it was true. I had not fabricated anything. I had not exaggerated. I had simply held up a mirror, and the monster he saw in the reflection was himself. He stumbled back, leaning against the doorframe for support, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding of his own ruin. From that day on, everything collapsed for him. The internal investigation at his company was swift. Faced with the irrefutable evidence I had provided, the IRS evidence his own company soon uncovered, he was fired for cause. His reputation, carefully cultivated over 2 decades, was annihilated overnight. The news of the corporate cheater scandal, as the gossip blogs gleefully dubbed it, spread through our social and professional circles like wildfire. Friends stopped calling, colleagues crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah. He began to lose his composure, his days a blur of frantic calls to lawyers and long hours spent staring at the walls, the weight of his actions finally crushing him. But as his world fell apart, mine began to come together. Each piece of his life that crumbled was a stone I used to build the foundation of my own. I watched him disintegrate, not with glee, but with the detached satisfaction of a project coming to completion. The audit was over. The debt was being called in. He was losing everything. But me, I was just beginning to feel alive again. The courtroom was an exercise in beige, a sterile, sound-absorbing box designed to strip all the color from human tragedy. Everything from the worn carpet to the wood veneer paneling was the color of faded manila folders. It was a place where messy, passionate lives were broken down, quantified, and processed into neat, legally binding columns of loss and gain. I sat beside Maggie, my back ramrod straight, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Across the aisle sat Ethan and his lawyer, a slick, overworked man who looked like he'd been dressed by a committee on corporate despair. Ethan was not the man I had married, nor the panicked animal who had screamed at me in my office. He was a new creation, a performance piece titled The Contrite Man. He wore a somber charcoal suit. His hair was perfectly styled, and his face was arranged into an expression of profound, soulful regret. He was playing the lead in a tragedy of his own making, and he was determined to win an Oscar for it. His lawyer began, his voice a smooth, practiced balm intended to soothe and persuade. He painted a picture of Ethan as a pillar of the community, a loving father, a dedicated husband who, under immense professional pressure, had made a single regrettable error in judgment. He used words like misguided, transgression, and momentary lapse. He was trying to frame an epic betrayal as a minor clerical error. Then it was Ethan's turn to speak. He stood, but he didn't look at me. He looked at the judge, a woman in her late 60s with intelligent, weary eyes that had seen every lie a man could tell a woman. "Your Honor," Ethan began, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed emotion, "I won't stand here and make excuses for my behavior. I failed. I failed my family. I failed my wife." He paused, letting the weight of his confession settle in the quiet room. "But I need you to understand that my actions did not come from a place of malice. They came from a place of confusion, of loneliness." He took a deep breath, as if the next words were physically painful to excavate. "I only made a mistake," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Because I loved the wrong person. The line was delivered with heartbreaking sincerity. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, an attempt to reframe himself not as the villain, but as a tragic hero who had simply lost his way. He was asking for pity, for understanding, for a man's second chance. When he sat down, the courtroom was silent. The judge looked over at me, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Moore," she said, "do you have a response?" I stood. I did not feel nervous. I felt a clarity so profound it was almost serene. I looked at Ethan, and for the first time, he was forced to meet my gaze. I let the silence stretch for a beat, letting his performance evaporate in the sterile air. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady, every word precisely enunciated. "My husband is correct. He made a mistake." I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes, a glimmer of hope that his gambit had worked. I let him have that moment, before I took it away forever. "But he is wrong about the nature of that mistake." I turned my gaze from him to the judge. "He didn't make a mistake because he loved the wrong person. He made a mistake because he thought I was stupid." A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the back of the room. Ethan's face went rigid, the mask of contrition shattering to reveal the raw fury beneath. His lawyer put a restraining hand on his arm. I had not raised my voice. I had not accused him of cruelty or infidelity. I had accused him of something far worse in his mind of miscalculating. I had reduced his grand, passionate tragedy to a simple, foolish error in judgment about his opponent. I had dismissed his emotional plea and replaced it with a cold, analytical fact. That was Maggie's cue. She rose, a sheaf of papers in her hand, her demeanor that of a surgeon about to make the first incision. "Your Honor," she began, "while Mr. Moore's narrative is compelling, my client prefers to deal in the language of evidence." What followed was a systematic, brutal dismantling of Ethan's entire life. Maggie was magnificent. She didn't grandstand or raise her voice. She simply presented the data. She projected the photo of Ethan and Celine Harris embracing outside the Azure Palace onto a large screen at the front of the court. The image was high resolution, their joyful intimacy undeniable and obscene in the cold light of the courtroom. Then came the video, silent and damning. She presented the bank statements, highlighting the charge for the hotel room, the charge for the lingerie boutique, the string of lavish dinners. She presented the corporate registration for Celine Media LLC, with Celine Harris's name clearly listed as the sole proprietor. Next to the bank statement from E. Moore Inc., showing the $100,000 capital investment. She presented the screenshot of the text message from Celine, a final, perfect confirmation of their collusion. With each new piece of evidence, Ethan seemed to shrink in his chair. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty gray pallor. His lawyer objected weakly, citing relevance, but the judge overruled him every time with a flick of her wrist. The evidence was not just relevant, it was the entire story. The final act of Maggie's presentation was to submit the official notice from the IRS, confirming that Ethan was the subject of an active investigation for tax fraud, alongside a letter from his former employer confirming his termination was for cause, specifically the misappropriation of company funds. The air in the room was thick with the weight of his ruin. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. As Maggie sat down, he shot to his feet, his composure completely gone. "This is a character assassination," he sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's twisting everything. She's being too harsh. Your Honor, she's trying to destroy me." He was playing his last card, the victim. He was trying to paint me as the vengeful, merciless shrew, and himself as the poor soul being unfairly persecuted. He was appealing to the old, tired stereotype of the hysterical woman scorned. The judge watched him, her face impassive. She let him finish his tirade, the desperate words echoing and then dying in the quiet room. She looked at his lawyer, then at him, then, finally, at me. "Mr. Moore," the judge said, her voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority, "your wife is being harsh. She paused, and I saw Ethan's shoulders relax fractionally. Believing he had found an ally, the judge continued, her eyes boring into him. She is being harsh because she appears to be the only person in this room, aside from myself, who is telling the truth. The words landed like a gavel, final, absolute. The verdict was in before the judgment was even read. The judgment itself was a formality, a simple reading of the numbers that now defined our lives. Due to the overwhelming and meticulously documented evidence of financial infidelity and the deliberate dissipation of marital assets, the division would not be 50-50. I was awarded sole ownership of the house and the primary vehicle. The remaining marital assets, including retirement accounts and investments, were to be split 60-40 in my favor, to compensate for the funds he had stolen. He was, of course, solely responsible for any and all liabilities arising from the ongoing IRS investigation. He was left with his depleted personal savings, his ruined reputation, and the clothes on his back. He had been liquidated. We walked out of the courtroom into the bright, cold light of a Denver afternoon. We stood for a moment on the courthouse steps, a strange, suspended moment between our shared past and our separate futures. Fat, wet snowflakes had begun to fall, melting on the warm pavement. He looked at me, his eyes hollowed out, empty of the fire and arrogance that had once defined him. He looked like a man who had lost a war he never even knew he was fighting. I expected him to shout, to curse me, to say something, anything, but he was silent. I pulled the collar of my coat up around my neck, preparing to walk away and never look back. Then I turned to him one last time. "Justice doesn't need to shout, Ethan," I said, my voice barely a whisper against the quiet hiss of the falling snow. "It just needs to be silent." He flinched as if I had struck him. I turned and walked down the steps, leaving him standing there alone. The snow was cold on my face, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt profoundly and unshakably warm. The money sat in the Celine Media LLC account for exactly 30 days, an untouchable symbol of my first victory. It was more than just $100,000. It was a captured territory, the first piece of my old life that I had successfully liberated. It was the seed capital for my future, and I was determined to plant it somewhere meaningful. I could have simply absorbed it back into my own portfolio, letting it disappear into a sea of stocks and bonds. But that felt too quiet, too anticlimactic. This money needed to make a statement. It needed to build something real. I had lunch with Maggie at a small Italian place downtown a month after the divorce was finalized. The legal battle was over, but a new partnership was just beginning. Over plates of pasta, I slid a prospectus across the table to her. "I have an idea for our first joint venture," I said. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I thought you were the cautious financial planner. Rachel, I'm the gambler." "I am cautious," I replied. "Which is why I only invest in assets I understand, and I understand this one intimately." The prospectus was for a small, slightly neglected house on the shore of Grand Lake, a 2-bedroom A-frame with a wide deck and a private dock, surrounded by aspen and pine trees. It was the kind of property that real estate agents would describe as having good bones and rustic charm, which was code for needing a lot of work. Maggie looked at the photos, then back at me, a question in her eyes. "It's a nice spot," she said, "but why this one specifically?" I took a slow sip of my wine. 5 years ago, I began, my voice even. Ethan took me to see this property. It was for sale then, too. He stood on that deck, pointed out at the water, and told me that one day we would buy it. He said we'd gut it, build a new stone fireplace, and that our future would be right there. Sophie would learn to swim off that dock. We would grow old on that porch. It was one of his most beautiful promises. Maggie's expression hardened with understanding. And, I said. The next week, I found a receipt for a weekend trip to Napa in his briefcase, with Celine Harris. I had filed it away, another piece of data in the growing file against him, but I never forgot the promise or the place. The house had become a monument to his hypocrisy. It just came back on the market last week, I finished. The owners are motivated. I think we should buy it. Maggie leaned back, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. Rachel Moore, she said, raising her glass. You are a poet, a ruthless, brilliant poet. Let's buy his future. We used the $100,000 from the Celine Media account as the down payment. We didn't just buy a house. We foreclosed on a lie. The day the keys were in my hand, I drove up to the lake alone. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. The house was just as I remembered, but smaller, sadder. It was filled with the previous owner's forgotten things, old magazines, a chipped coffee mug, the faint, musty smell of a place unloved. For a moment, standing in the dusty living room, a wave of the old grief washed over me. The ghost of that broken promise was everywhere. But then I looked out the large picture window at the lake, its surface a perfect, placid mirror of the vast blue sky, and I knew what I had to do. This wasn't a place for ghosts. It was a place for a resurrection. The renovation became my therapy. I hired a contractor, but I was there every day, in old jeans and a t-shirt, my hands covered in dust and paint. The first thing to go was the dark, oppressive wood paneling that covered every wall. We tore it down, revealing the clean white drywall beneath. The old, stained carpets were ripped up, exposing beautiful hardwood floors that I had sanded and refinished myself. Every choice I made was a deliberate act of erasure and reinvention. Where Ethan had envisioned a dark, masculine stone fireplace, I installed a sleek, modern gas insert surrounded by clean white tile. The dingy kitchen was gutted, replaced with bright white cabinets, quartz countertops, and stainless steel appliances. Every wall, in every room, was painted the same shade of clean, brilliant white. I was bleaching the memory of him out of the very bones of the place. I threw out every last stick of the old furniture, every chipped plate, every faded curtain. When it was done, the house was unrecognizable. It was filled with light, air, and possibility. The last thing I did was hang a new, custom-made sign by the front door. It was carved from a single piece of light-colored wood, the letters simple and elegant. It read, Freedom Cottage. The cottage became my sanctuary, but my work was in the city. I didn't go back to my old firm. I couldn't. I had been changed by my experience, my skills honed for a new, more personal purpose. I used a portion of my divorce settlement to lease a small, elegant office space in a historic building in Cherry Creek. I hung a simple brass plaque on the door, More Financial Strategies, Your Future, Secured. My business model was simple. I was a financial planner. But my clientele was exclusively women, specifically, women navigating the treacherous financial waters of separation and divorce. Women who, like me, had woken up one day to find that the person they had trusted with their future had secretly been building another one. My first clients came through Maggie. They were women in the midst of their own battles, feeling lost, terrified, and powerless. I didn't just offer them financial advice. I offered them a strategy. I taught them how to read a bank statement like a detective, how to trace the digital breadcrumbs of a secret life, how to separate marital assets from misappropriated funds. I helped them set up their own LLCs, secure their own lines of credit, and build financial firewalls around themselves and their children. I became their wartime consigliere. We would sit in my quiet, sunlit office, and they would tell me their stories, their voices often breaking with pain and betrayal. And I would listen. Then I would turn my computer screen towards them and say, "Okay, let's look at the numbers. Let's find your freedom." One afternoon, sitting with a new client, a surgeon whose husband had been funding his gambling addiction with their children's college fund, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "My friends say I'm being cruel," she whispered, "that I should just walk away and not make it so hard for him." I reached across my desk and put my hand on hers. "They say I was cruel, too," I told her, my voice gentle but firm. "No, you are not being cruel. You are just finally learning how to choose yourself." There is nothing cruel about that. My phone rang one evening while I was at the cottage, sitting on the new deck, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and pink. The caller ID was a block number, but I knew who it was. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short, his voice raspy and unfamiliar. "Rach, it's me. Ethan, can we please just talk? I just want to talk." I listened to the message, then deleted it. I felt no anger, no pity, not even a flicker of curiosity. He was a bad investment I had already divested from. I typed out a short text message to the last number I had for him. "I am busy living well." I hit send, then blocked the number for good. I put my phone down and took a sip of my wine, the silence of the lake my only companion. As the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the mountains, I looked out at the dark, still water. I thought about the $100,000, the money that had been stolen from a dream of this very place. It wasn't lost. It hadn't vanished. It had simply been reallocated. It had changed hands, moving from a man who saw it as a tool for his deceit to a woman who used it as the foundation for her independence. It had been an investment after all, the best one I ever made. It had just gone to a new owner, and the new owner, I knew with a certainty that was as deep and as calm as the lake in front of me, was infinitely more deserving. A year can be a lifetime. In the 12 months since the divorce had been finalized, I had built an entirely new one. My financial advisory firm had flourished, my name becoming a quiet, powerful word-of-mouth recommendation in certain circles of Denver. My office, on the top floor of a restored brick and timber building downtown, was my testament to this new life. It was a space of clean lines, natural light, and quiet competence, with a commanding view of the mountains that had once felt like a cage and now felt like a promise. The woman who worked here bore little resemblance to the one who had cried over a flight confirmation. This woman was calm, solvent, and entirely, unapologetically her own. I was in the middle of reviewing a client's asset portfolio when my assistant, a sharp young woman named Chloe, buzzed me on the intercom, her voice hesitant. "Rachel, I'm sorry to bother you. There's a man here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. An Ethan Moore." The name felt like a word from a dead language. It held no emotional charge, only a distant, clinical familiarity. Like a case study I had once read. I felt a flicker of surprise, but no anxiety, no dread. "It's fine, Chloe," I said, my voice even. "Send him in." I swiveled my chair to face the door, my hands resting on the cool, polished surface of my desk. I was not in my home, our home. I was in my territory. He was the one asking for entry. The man who walked through the door was a ghost. The expensive suit, the confident stride, the easy charm, all of it was gone, stripped away to reveal the diminished man beneath. He was thin. His shoulders slumped inside a cheap, ill-fitting blazer. His face was gaunt, etched with the fine lines of chronic stress and poor sleep. He looked older, tired, and profoundly defeated. He stood awkwardly in the center of the room, his eyes darting around at the evidence of my success as if it were a foreign country. He seemed to be searching for some trace of the woman he had known, the life he had lost, but there was nothing here for him. This world was entirely of my own making. "Rachel," he said, his voice raspy, "your office is nice." "It is," I replied, my tone neutral. I did not ask him to sit. I did not offer him a drink. I simply waited. The silence stretched, amplifying his discomfort. He was the supplicant here, the one who had come with a purpose. Finally, he seemed to gather himself, his gaze fixing on me with a desperate, searching intensity. "I won't take up your time," he said, fumbling with his words. I needed to understand something. For me." He took a small step closer. "When?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "When did you start to hate me?" It was a classic Ethan question. He was searching for a single event, a flashpoint of emotion he could isolate and analyze. He wanted to believe my actions were born from a simple, understandable narrative of a woman scorned, that I had discovered the affair and, in a fit of jealous rage, decided to destroy him. He needed to believe it was about hate, because hate was an emotion he could comprehend. Hate was the flip side of love, an acknowledgement of his power over me. I looked at him, at this hollowed-out man, and I felt nothing, not hatred, not pity, just the quiet finality of a closed account. Hate is a passionate emotion. Ethan, I said, my voice as calm and cool as the glass of water on my desk. It requires an investment of energy. My actions were never about passion. I leaned forward slightly, pinning him with my gaze. If you want a specific moment when everything changed, I can give you one. It wasn't when I found the tickets. It wasn't when I saw you with her. It was in the precise, quiet moment that I realized you genuinely believed I would never be smart enough to win. He stared at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. He didn't understand. He was still thinking in terms of love and betrayal. He couldn't grasp that I was talking about something else entirely. It was never about her, I continued, my voice cutting through his confusion. She was just a symptom, a liability you failed to account for. The real betrayal was your assumption that I was a passive asset in your portfolio, a docile, domestic creature who managed the household accounts but lacked the intellectual capacity to see the whole board. You lied to me about the family trip because you were confident I wouldn't check the booking. You siphoned money from our accounts because you assumed I wouldn't notice the discrepancies. You built a whole new life with our shared money because you fundamentally believed that I was your supporting cast, the woman in the background, too trusting and too simple to ever challenge the star of the show. Your mistake wasn't cheating on me. Your mistake was underestimating me. That's when it was over. The truth of it, the cold, analytical reality of it, seemed to land on him with a physical weight. He visibly sagged, the last bit of fight draining out of him. He stumbled back to the chair opposite my desk and sank into it, his face in his hands. He was silent for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet with unshed tears. "I lost everything," he whispered, the words a raw, ragged admission of defeat. It was a plea for sympathy, a final attempt to cast himself as the victim of my ruthless campaign. I would not allow it. "No," I said, my voice sharp, corrective. "You are misstating the cause and effect. You didn't just lose everything as if you were the victim of a natural disaster. You lost because you underestimated me. You lost because you played a sloppy, arrogant game against an opponent you never bothered to respect. Your loss was a direct and foreseeable consequence of your own hubris. Don't attribute it to my cruelty. Attribute it to your incompetence." His tears finally fell, two silent tracks down his gaunt cheeks. He looked utterly broken, a man who had not only lost the game, but had been forced to understand exactly how and why he had been outplayed. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture of futility. He had one last question, the last desperate grasp for a piece of the past he could hold on to. "Did you ever love me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. He wasn't asking about the end. He was asking about the beginning. He needed to know if any of it had ever been real. "I did," I said, and for the first time, I allowed a flicker of something other than cold analysis into my voice. I gave him that small, honest truth. "I loved the man I married. I loved the idea of the life we were building. I loved who we were." I paused, then delivered the final, liberating clause. "But I love freedom more." That was it, the final word. There was nothing left to say. He seemed to understand that. He nodded slowly, a gesture of complete and final surrender. He pushed himself up from the chair and walked out of my office without another word, without looking back. I didn't watch him go. I swiveled my chair back to face the mountains, the view that was entirely mine. I sat for a moment in the perfect, peaceful silence of his absence. Then I buzzed my assistant. "Chloe," I said, "could you please bring the bottle of champagne from the mini-fridge and 2 glasses?" As Chloe set the bottle down, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out a small Bluetooth speaker. I put on a quiet, classical piano piece, the notes filling the office with a sense of calm and order. I poured the champagne myself. The crisp pop of the cork, the only sound that mattered. It was a celebration, not of his ruin, but of my survival. As the bubbles rose in my glass, I thought about the long, painful journey from that first lie about a family vacation to this moment of quiet, absolute victory. The lesson, I realized, was never about the $100,000. The money was just a number. The real lesson was about the incalculable price a man pays for the simple, fatal mistake of thinking a woman is worth less than he is. The quiet, personal satisfaction of my victory was never meant to last. In the modern world, a compelling story is a form of currency, and the narrative of my financial resurrection was too valuable to remain private. My firm's success, built on a niche of empowering women through financial literacy, had begun to attract attention. First, a feature in a Denver business journal, then a mention in a national magazine's Women in Finance issue. It was a slow build, a steady accumulation of professional credibility. Then, the call came that shifted everything from the local to the national stage. It was a producer from Market Movers, a sleek, influential daily show on a major financial news network. They were doing a week-long series on financial independence after life-altering events, and they wanted me as a guest. My first instinct was to decline. I had won my war in the quiet of a courtroom and the solitude of my own resolve. I had no desire to parade my past trauma for public consumption. But as I considered it, I realized my perspective was wrong. This wasn't about my past. It was about my present. It was an opportunity to control my own story, to frame it not as a tale of a messy divorce, but as a case study in strategic survival. It was a chance to amplify my mission on a scale I couldn't achieve one client at a time. I saw the power in it, the power to take the most painful experience of my life and reforge it into a tool for others. I accepted. The television studio in New York was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, bright lights, hushed technicians, and the faint, antiseptic smell of electronics. I sat across from the host, a sharp, intelligent woman named Sarah Chen, whose on-air persona was a blend of empathy and incisive questioning. I was not nervous. I had spent the last 2 years of my life preparing for moments like this, learning to speak the language of facts and figures with unshakable calm. When Sarah asked me what the catalyst was for starting my own firm, I didn't flinch. I didn't mention Ethan's name or Celine's. I didn't speak of heartbreak. I spoke of data. I started my firm, I said, looking directly into the camera, after a significant personal event forced me to conduct a full forensic audit of my own life. I discovered a major financial discrepancy, a 6-figure marital asset that had been fraudulently reclassified as a business expense for a shell company. It was a devastating discovery. Personally, but professionally, it was an epiphany. Sarah leaned in, sensing the core of the story. An epiphany. How so? Because, I explained, it taught me that for many women, financial literacy isn't a luxury. It's a vital form of self-defense. That single painful transaction made me realize that sometimes you have to lose a great deal of money to finally understand its true value. The loss of that asset became my seed capital, not just for a new business, but for an entirely new life built on the principle of absolute financial transparency and independence. I spoke for 10 minutes, outlining the strategies women could use to protect themselves, the importance of having their own credit, their own accounts, and a clear-eyed understanding of their household's financial health. I turned my personal tragedy into a universal lesson. The story of the lost money was the hook, the human element that made the dense financial advice accessible and urgent. When the interview was over, I felt a sense of calm. I had told my truth, on my terms. I had no idea what was coming. By the time my flight landed back in Denver, the interview was already exploding. The network had packaged a 90-second clip, my anecdote about the fraudulent business expense and my line about losing money to find its value, and posted it on all their social media channels. It went viral with a speed that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The headline they ran with was pure digital gold. Financial planner explains how losing 100K in her divorce led her to her true calling. The internet, in its infinite wisdom, shortened it. The narrative that rocketed across social media was simpler, more powerful. The woman who lost 100K and found herself. My life changed overnight. My firm's website crashed from the traffic. My email inbox became an avalanche of messages, not just from potential clients, but from women, hundreds and hundreds of them, from every corner of the country. They were short, raw, and incredibly powerful. I just opened my first savings account in my own name. I'm 47. Thank you. Your interview gave me the courage to finally ask my husband for the password to our investment portfolio. I left him a month ago with nothing. Watching you, I realized I have everything I need to start over. You gave me hope. Each message was a testament to the power of a shared story. I had taken my private pain and turned it into public courage. While my star was rising, Ethan's was being extinguished. I never had to mention his name. The internet did the work for me. Digital sleuths and gossip columnists, smelling a juicy story of a villain to my hero, quickly connected my now famous narrative to the old, local articles about the corporate cheater scandal at his former firm. The stories were rehashed and recirculated. Now, with a new, national context, he became the unspoken antagonist in my success story, a faceless symbol of the kind of man whose underestimation of his wife leads to his own ruin. His name was dragged through the mud all over again, but this time, the mud was everywhere. I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to say a word. In the new narrative, he was merely a footnote in my origin story. His reputation wasn't just damaged, it was rendered irrelevant. The power reversal was absolute and complete. I knew I had to channel this momentum into something bigger than just my own firm. This was a movement, not a moment. With Maggie's legal help, I established a nonprofit foundation, seeded with a significant portion of my own profits. We called it the Freedom Fund. Its mission was simple: to provide grants to women who needed to restart their lives after a divorce caused by financial fraud or infidelity. It offered money for legal fees, for job training, for the first and last month's rent on a new apartment. It was the answer to the questions so many women faced. How can I afford to leave? I was taking the power I had won and giving it away, creating a virtuous cycle of independence. One morning, about a month after the interview had aired, an email landed in my inbox that made me stop cold. The subject line was simple: job application. The name of the sender was Celine Harris. My hands hovered over the keyboard. A strange, electric stillness in the air. I opened it. It was a short, pathetic letter. She wrote that she had seen my interview and was so inspired by my journey. She mentioned that her own media consulting business had failed to launch, and that she was currently looking for a position where she could learn from a strong female leader. She had attached her resume. The irony was so thick, so darkly perfect. It was almost poetic. The woman who had tried to build her future on the ruins of my own was now asking me for a job. The namesake of the LLC that had funded my escape was now begging to be on my payroll. I could have replied. I could have sent a single, cutting sentence that would have eviscerated her. I could have forwarded the email to Maggie for a good, cynical laugh. I did none of those things. I simply read the email, a small, cold smile on my face. Then I selected it, and without a moment's hesitation, I moved my cursor and clicked the delete button. I sent her email, and her entire existence, into the digital trash. I gave her no response, no acknowledgement, no closure, because I had learned that sometimes the most profound and beautiful judgment is not a fiery condemnation, but a wall of absolute, indifferent silence. The air at Grand Lake, a year to the day after Ethan's final, defeated exit from my office, was different. It was the same crisp, pine-scented air, but it no longer felt like a quiet refuge. Tonight, it felt like a celebration. Freedom Cottage, my bleached and beautified A-frame, was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a testament. It glowed from within, its large windows throwing warm rectangles of light onto the deck and the dark, glassy surface of the water. String lights were woven through the branches of the aspen trees, their tiny bulbs twinkling like a private constellation. The sound wasn't of silence, but of soft music, the clinking of glasses, and the low, happy murmur of genuine conversation. I had kept the guest list small. This wasn't a party for show. It was a gathering of the architects of my new life. Maggie was there, of course, holding court by the outdoor fire pit, a glass of expensive scotch in her hand, looking every bit the victorious general at rest. A few of my oldest friends, the ones who had weathered the storm with me, bringing over casseroles and listening without judgment in the dark. Early days, and most importantly to me, two of my very first clients from the firm. They had come to me as broken, terrified women, and now they stood on my deck, laughing, their faces animated and confident, talking about the new businesses they had started with the settlements I had helped them secure. We were a small, unlikely tribe, bound together by the shared experience of turning ruin into a renaissance. I moved through the small crowd, my bare feet on the smooth wood of the deck I had sanded myself, a tray of appetizers in my hand. I felt a sense of ease so profound it was almost unnerving. For years, hosting a party had been a performance. I would worry about the food, the music, whether Ethan was charming the right people, whether my smile was convincing enough. Tonight, there was no performance. There was only presence. I was simply here, in this beautiful place I had built, surrounded by people I loved, and the feeling was as light and effortless as the breeze coming off the lake. As I set the tray down, I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the sliding door. The woman looking back at me was a stranger to the Rachel of 3 years ago. Her eyes were clear, her shoulders were relaxed, but the most startling difference was her smile. It reached her eyes. It wasn't a polite arrangement of facial muscles. It was a genuine expression of a deep and settled contentment. I realized, with a jolt that was both startling and wonderful, that this was the first time I had seen myself truly smile in years. I had forgotten what it looked like. Just then, a pair of small arms wrapped around my waist, and a head of blonde hair burrowed into my side. I looked down to see Sophie, her face alight with the joy of the party, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. She had been running around with a friend's daughter, their shrieks of laughter the evening's most beautiful soundtrack. She looked up at me, her blue eyes, so much like my own, suddenly serious and perceptive in the way only a child's can be. "Mom," she said, her voice quiet but clear over the music. "You're happy now." The words were so simple, so direct, so profoundly true, that they pierced me to the core. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. She had seen the performance for years, had lived in the quiet, chilly atmosphere of a house where happiness was an act, and now, she saw the real thing. A lump formed in my throat, but it wasn't one of sadness. It was one of overwhelming, cathartic gratitude. I knelt down, so we were eye to eye. I smoothed the hair back from her forehead. "Yes, honey," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I am, because I chose peace over pretending." She gave me another fierce hug. Then, her duty as a serious social observer complete, she darted off again, back into the world of childhood games and laughter. I stood up, my eyes misty, and found Maggie watching me from across the deck, a knowing smile on her face. She came over and handed me a freshly poured glass of champagne. "Quite the journey. More," she said, her voice softer than usual. She gestured with her glass at the glowing cottage, the happy guests, the serene lake. From $100,000 loss to all this, a thriving business, a beautiful home, a nonprofit. I'd say you've become a millionaire in freedom. Quite a trade. I looked at her, then out at the water, which was reflecting the thousands of stars now visible in the clear mountain sky. The word trade didn't feel right. A trade implies an exchange of one thing for another of equal value. What had happened was not an exchange. It was a correction, a balancing of the scales that had been tipped for far too long. "It wasn't a trade, Maggie," I said, my voice finding its strength again. "It was justice." She nodded slowly, her smile widening. "Justice," she repeated, liking the sound of it. "I'll drink to that." She raised her glass. "To new lives," she said, her voice carrying across the deck. Our friends heard her, and a chorus of glasses clinked together. "To new lives," they echoed, their voices warm and sincere under the stars. We stood there for a moment, a small circle of people who had, in one way or another, built new lives from the ashes of old ones. And then, as if on cue, a sudden, brilliant explosion of green light blossomed over the lake. It was followed by a deep, satisfying boom that echoed off the mountains. I had arranged for a small, private fireworks display with a local company. A final, extravagant punctuation mark on the evening. Another burst, this one a spiderweb of glittering gold, then a cascade of crackling silver. Everyone on the deck turned to watch, their faces upturned and illuminated by the fleeting, beautiful light. The explosions were reflected perfectly on the water's surface, creating a stunning, symmetrical universe of fire and stars. I didn't watch the fireworks in the sky. I watched their reflection in the lake. I thought of the man who had stood on this very spot and promised me a future. His words as empty and insubstantial as the smoke that now drifted across the water. He had promised me a house. I had built a home. He had promised me a comfortable life. I had built a meaningful one. He had promised me his future, and I had taken back my own. As a final, magnificent firework, a huge weeping willow of shimmering purple and white, lit up the entire lake, a profound and simple truth settled over me. It was a feeling not of victory, not of revenge, but of wholeness. In the quiet aftermath of the last explosion, with the scent of gunpowder in the air and the cheers of my friends around me, I finally understood. I hadn't lost anything. Not the $100,000, not the 15 years of my life, not the man I thought I had loved. None of it was a loss. It was a shedding, a painful, necessary sloughing off of a life that was never truly mine. I had simply been returned to myself, stronger, richer, and freer than I had ever been before. The last of the fireworks had faded, leaving behind the scent of smoke and the deep, contented silence of the mountains. The party had softened into its final, beautiful moments. A few friends still lingered by the fire pit, their voices a low, comfortable murmur. The string lights cast a warm, gentle glow, and the lake was a sheet of black glass, perfectly reflecting the stars. I was standing at the edge of the deck, looking out at the water, when a quiet voice spoke beside me. It was Anya, the journalist from the magazine, who had been a discreet and thoughtful observer all evening. "Rachel," she said softly, holding a small digital recorder, "I know the party is winding down. I just have one last question, if that's okay." I turned from the lake to face her. In the soft light, she looked less like an interviewer and more like a confidant. "Of course," I said. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Looking back," she began, "at all of it, the discovery, the pain, the fight, the way your life was turned inside out and put on public display. If you could go back to that moment, right before you opened that email with the flight confirmation, knowing everything that was about to happen, would you do anything differently?" It was the question everyone always wanted to ask, the one that hung in the air after the story was told, the search for regret, the desire to know if the cost of the war was too high. I didn't have to think about the answer. I didn't think of the lonely nights, the fear, the rage, or the man who had been the catalyst for it all. I thought, instead, of the woman I used to be, the one who lived in a beautiful house but felt like a ghost in it, the one whose smiles were a carefully managed asset, the one who didn't know the feeling of breathing air that was entirely her own. I thought of her, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the fire that had burned her world to the ground, allowing something new to grow. I turned my gaze from Anya and looked straight ahead, as if a camera was there, capturing this final, definitive statement for the world. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud, but it was filled with a certainty that was as solid and as real as the mountain before me. "No," I said, "I wouldn't change a single thing." I let the word hang in the crisp night air. Then I gave her the reason, the thesis statement of my new life. Because he taught me the most valuable lesson I have ever learned. He taught me that freedom is the real luxury, and I was finally able to afford it. Anya stared at me for a moment, the professional facade of the journalist falling away to reveal the woman beneath, who simply understood. She slowly lowered the recorder, a look of profound respect in her eyes. She gave a small, knowing nod, then quietly stepped away, leaving me alone with my final thought. And then, a sound bubbled up from deep inside me. It was a laugh. It wasn't the triumphant roar of a victor or the cynical chuckle of the vengeful. It was light. It was airy. It was the sound of a burden being set down for good. The sound of a soul that had finally learned to fly. The world seemed to pull back then, the lens widening, my quiet laughter, a gentle counterpoint to the chirping of crickets, was the only sound. The image of me on the deck began to recede, and the focus shifted, panning out over the dark, still water of the lake. The warm lights from the cottage and the twinkling stars from the string lights all shimmered and danced on the surface. A beautiful, abstract painting of peace and light. There was no need for another word. No apology was necessary. No further revenge was required. The accounts had been settled. The war was over. There was only me, the woman who had made $100,000 disappear, and in its place had created a new life of immeasurable worth. The image of the shimmering water held for a long moment, a perfect, quiet peace. Then, it slowly faded to black, and on the screen, a final, simple truth appeared in clean, white letters. Freedom is the real luxury. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know where you are in the world. Let's connect and share our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and hitting that hype button to help it reach others who might need to hear it.